Are you broken over your sin? Can you even acknowledge your sin? Do you have an understanding of where you fall short and where you make mistakes according to God's law? Tonight, we're going to look at David and Psalm 51 and how he acknowledges his sin and what he says and how he calls upon God. I'm glad you're here. Let's just dive into the text. Psalm 51, starting in verse 1, says, "To the chief musician, a psalm of David, when Nathan the prophet went to him after he had gone into Bathsheba. Have mercy upon me, O God, according to your loving kindness, according to the multitude of your tender mercies. Blot out my transgressions, wash me thoroughly from my iniquity, and cleanse me from my sin. For I acknowledge my transgression, and my sin is always before me. Against you and you alone have I sinned, and done this evil in your sight, that you may be found just when you speak, and blameless when you judge. Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin my mother conceived me. Behold, you desire truth in the inward parts, and in the hidden part you will make me to know wisdom." So, David writes this psalm after he had sinned with Bathsheba. If you don't know that story, David saw a woman that he lusted after. It was another man's wife. He had the man killed, and then he decided to take advantage of the woman, essentially, depending on your interpretation of it, either rapes her or seduces her as the king. Whatever happens, he has sex with her, and they have a child. And because of the sin, God takes the child. And Nathan the prophet comes to him, and he explains to David in a very particular way about how David had sinned. And so here we see David, in his brokenness over his sin, crying out towards God and calling upon God's character in very specific ways. First of all, we have his loving kindness, his tender mercy. You know, when we can acknowledge our sin, and when we can say, you know what, I've done wrong and I am in need of forgiveness, we are so thankful that these are part of God. These parts are a part of God's character. He is not just wrath and hellfire and brimstone. He's not just discipline and teaching. No, he has a forgiving and tender and loving kindness side that can be called on as well. And so David does call on this. And as we go on, the middle of verse 1 says, "Blot out my transgressions, wash me thoroughly from my iniquity, and cleanse me from my sin." Those are three different words identifying sin: transgressions, iniquity, and sin. There's a blotting out, there's a washing, and then there's a cleansing. First, we're getting rid of it, then we're being washed from it, and then we're being cleansed to then move forward in this new, clean way. He wants a thorough cleansing, washing, and removing of this particular sin that he knows he's committed. And as we go on in verse 3, it says, "For I acknowledge my transgression, and my sin is always before me." I think this is such an important part of Psalm 51 because most people, it would seem, don't want to talk about their sin, don't want to acknowledge their sin. And they try to put their sin behind them, not ever addressing the sin. And David says clearly, no, it's always before me. It's always on my mind. It always gets triggered one way or another. And I'm reminded of my sin. And so I acknowledge it. I was wrong. I've done this thing. As he goes on in verse 4, "Against you and you alone have I sinned and done evil in your sight." Notice he doesn't say, I haven't sinned against Bathsheba. I haven't sinned against Uriah. I haven't sinned against the people of Judah. I haven't sinned against all a high priest. He doesn't say any of those things. He goes to the highest authority and divinity and says, no, against you and you alone. Against you and you alone have I sinned. This is such a crucial moment in this psalm because he acknowledges before God that it is God he's done wrong. And that's the most important part of all of this. Against the Creator, it is that you've done wrong. Because he's the leader of the nation. He's the king. He's expected to hold that line. And he says, well, I have failed. I failed to do that. And then as it goes on, it says that you may be found just when you speak and blameless when you judge. I'm acknowledging this because I know that you're just and I know that you're righteous. And I know that you're not going to let this pass. You're not going to let this slide. And so God, in his majesty, sends Nathan to tell David, you've sinned. And David says, you're right. And God is just for sending you. And God is righteous for calling me out. God does this to us all the time. And the wonder is, can we acknowledge it? Can we say, you know what? You're right. You're right. Lord, why has there been such silence from between you and I? Why has this happened? Have I done something? Is there something in my life that's gotten in the way of our communication and relationship? Show me. Most people won't pray that because they're afraid that if the Lord shows them what has caused a wedge, that it's something that they really don't want to change. It's something that they like. And it would be hard for them to acknowledge that thing. Surely not, Lord, not that. So, as we go on, verse 5, behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin my mother conceived me. I was a sinner from birth. I have no excuse. I was a sinner the moment I came forth from my mother's womb. And then this is the amazing verse in verse 6. Behold, you desire truth in the inner parts. Another translation is you desire faithfulness in the womb. And in the hidden part you will make known to me. You will make me known wisdom, to know wisdom. David is desiring and he's acknowledging that I'm a sinner. I was a sinner from the beginning. There's never been a time in my life where I was not a sinner or was getting ready to, or didn't have a sin nature. He's acknowledging his sin nature. So then in verse 7, we get to start into this next section, right? 7 seems to start a different direction in this psalm. Purge me with hyssop and I shall be clean. Wash me and I shall be whiter than snow. Again, we're seeing a recapitulation of this imagery of washing, cleansing, using hyssop, that I want to be clean. I want to be whiter than snow. I want this removed from me. And then in verse 8 he says, make me hear joy and gladness, that the bones that you have broken may rejoice. Hide your face from my sin and blot out all my iniquities. Again, we have that imagery of blotting out my iniquity. But then he adds, he wants to hear joy and gladness. You know, anytime he thinks of this sin and this sin is ever before him, there is no joy or gladness because it's very evident to him what he's done, and it rids him of joy and gladness and peace. No, it torments him. And he wants to hear joy and gladness again. Because with this sin ever before him, it is consistently robbing him of the joy and gladness. Do you have that kind of sin in your life? That unaddressed sin? That sin that you keep tucked away, but it consistently robs you of your joy and gladness? Bring it out in the open and kill it. Ask God to blot it out. It's the only way to get rid of it. And then we have this beautiful verse in verse 10 that we've had many hymns written after. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Do not cast me away from your presence, and do not take your Holy Spirit from me. Now this is such an interesting and amazing verse. A couple verses here. First of all, he's asking for a new heart to clean and create a clean heart. There again, there's that cleanliness he's desiring. To renew a spirit. Again, he wants to be made new. He wants to be brand new. He wants a new heart. He wants a new spirit. And then he's asking for something not to be done. All of this time he's asking for things to be done. Now we transition for what he doesn't want to happen. Do not cast me away from your presence. I don't want there to be a void between you and I. I don't want there to come into this place where I can't hear from you. I don't feel like you're near to me. And don't take your Holy Spirit from me. A lot of people would say that when the New Testament happened and when Jesus came, this isn't a thing anymore. The Holy Spirit doesn't leave. The Holy Spirit can't be taken from you. And I would argue that that's not correct. The Holy Spirit is the same as he was here as he was then. And I don't believe in this nonsense about somehow when you receive Christ, you're baptized and you begin to walk and you have the Holy Spirit guiding you and you apostatize and turn away completely, that somehow you've caged the Holy Spirit within you against his will and he can never leave. That's madness. I don't know where we get that. But maybe that's from the once saved, always saved doctrine. Maybe that's where that comes from. But here clearly in Psalm 51, David states, do not take your Holy Spirit from me. So clearly that's a thing. And he doesn't want that to happen. Restore to me the joy of your salvation and uphold me by your generous spirit. There again, the joy. And we have a new word, a new character of God, generous, by your generous spirit. God is so generous to us, and we don't deserve it. We don't deserve his generosity. But oh, how thankful we are for it. So then as we go, we get into what would be a call to action, right? Then I will teach transgressors your ways, and sinners shall be converted to you. So I want to be clean. I want to be made new. I want to do the right thing. I want you to stay near to me and keep your Holy Spirit within me so I can do your will. I don't want to be cleaned from my sin. I don't want a new slate so that I can turn around and do another thing that's wretched in your eyes. No, I want to be clean. I want to be forgiven so then I can go do what you would have me to do. I can proclaim your goodness and your mercy and teach sinners your ways and convert the lost. That's what I want to be clean for. That's what I want to be renewed for. I want to be renewed so that I can go and move your kingdom. David's mind is of his father's work. David has his father's mind. He wants to be renewed. He wants the Lord to renew him so then he can turn around and do it to others as well. Deliver me from the guilt of bloodshed, O God, the God of my salvation, and my tongue shall sing aloud your righteousness. O Lord, open my lips, and my mouth shall show forth your praise. Okay, so now David did shed a lot of blood. He was a warrior king. He cut down many, many men. He wants to be delivered from that guilt. Clearly that has haunted him a lot. I mean, you can't see that much death and not have it pry on your mind. And he says he wants an opportunity to worship. I want to worship. I want to come before my king and sing praises. But I need a new heart for that. Because the heart that I have right now is guilt-ridden. And it's burdened heavy. And it's not joyful. And I need that to worship you. So please give me that. Verse 16, for you do not desire sacrifice, or else I would give it. You do not delight in burnt offerings. The sacrifice, O God, the sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. These, O God, you will not despise. David acknowledges that God does not want his burnt offerings. He does not want the blood of rams, the flesh of goats. He doesn't want any of this. He tells you what he truly desires, and that's a changing of the heart. That's a brokenness over your sin. That's a contrite heart, a humble heart, that you can bow your head before him and say, I have sinned. I have done wrong. Renew me. Do good in your good pleasure to Zion. Build the wall of Jerusalem, then you shall be pleased with sacrifices of righteousness, with burnt offerings and whole burnt offerings. Then you shall offer bulls on your altar. Notice he then transitions to, then we'll do this. But I can't do this until I have the right heart. I have to have the right heart posture to do this for you to want it. If I'm just going through the motions, it's not going to please you. I need a new heart to then offer these sacrifices, these holy things of you to you, for you then to receive them. If I do them begrudgingly or out of some kind of tradition, that's not what you want. You want the person first, and then the offering and sacrifice come next. But you must have the person first. You must have the heart of the person before the offering and sacrifice is genuine. Acknowledge your sin. Call out to God to remove it from you and give you a clean heart so that you can truly worship him, and he will receive you after that. I love you guys, and may the Lord bless you.